Dr. Jerry Bergman. Dr. Bergman, how good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Dr. Bergman is one of the most credentialed guests that we have on Origins. He has 2 PhDs and literally a half a dozen master's degrees in various areas of science. But one of your passions is fossils, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I've always loved collecting fossils.
You've been collecting them for a long time. How many do you think you have?
I'm not sure, but I have quite a few.
Quite a few. And how many of them are there in the world today?
There are billions. Fossils, you go to a fossil show and you can buy fossils, nice fossils, for 50 cents. Now, of course, really large ones, rare fossils cost more money, but they're really not that expensive. It's an inexpensive hobby.
Now, fossils are very important because Darwin based a lot of his theory on what he thought would be found, not that he saw, but that he thought would be found in the future in fossils.
Right. He thought the fossil record would either support or refute his idea of evolution.
And so we're here to sort of bring that into account and say, what has the fossil record shown us?
Right. Let me show you some examples.
Would love to have you do that, sir.
Of fossils. The earliest known fern, for example. Now, most of these pictures I'll show you are the earliest examples we have of the various examples of life that we've collected in fossils. And the earliest known ferns have remained the same, we know, for approximately 300 million years, and if you compare a modern fern with a fossil fern, you can see they are identical.
Now, I just have to ask you, do you believe that fossil's 300 million years old?
Well, I'm not going to, the dates, I didn't date them, so I don't know. But it's interesting, if you look at the dates, it looks like, assuming they are correct, it looks like a lot of life, most life, has not changed at all in hundreds of millions of years.
So you're going with the dates of the people who have recorded them?
Right. These dates are all of the authorities who have dated them. And I don't want to go into various techniques of dating, but nonetheless, we'll just assume these are correct.
Okay, we'll just go with their dates for this show. Thank you.
Yeah, just assume they're correct and go forward. Sumac leaf, good example, and of course you can see the details here very clearly, and you can see the same details in the fossil example. A lot of these are from the Utah Green River Formation.
Okay.
And another example, an elm leaf. Elm is one that I'm very familiar with, and you can see even the veins of the leaf are shown in exquisite detail. And this is true with many of these examples. Sycamore leaf, very distinct leaf, as you can see here from the fossil record, and you can see by looking at a modern example, very distinct, and again, the vein structure is shown very clearly.
I'm not seeing much difference between the fossil and the living leaf there.
No, you can show I can show these to my grandchild and say, okay, what kind of fossil is that? Where is that from? And they can look at it and say, well, that's a ginkgo leaf. So there's obviously so similar. This is a modern day example, and this is a fossil example, and you can see again, they are, as far as we can tell from the fossils, identical. Grape leaf, very clearly in the fossil record. And there you can see a modern example. Spruce seed, we see these every summer, every spring, and again you can see nice and clear. Ponderosa pine, pine leaf, very distinct. And you can see the pine leaf right here, very distinct in the fossil evaluation. And crinoids, they're invertebrates, they live in shallow water, and they're detailed, you can see modern crinoids right here, and you can see in the fossil record, when you examine this under a microscope very carefully, you can see the enormous similarity, at least the external morphology is very, very similar to modern day examples. Starfish, this is dated at 490 million years old, and you can compare this, and again, what we see is, as far as we can tell, morphologically identical. Herring, there's a lot of examples of fish. Probably 80% of all fossils are of marine creatures. And the herring you can see, compare it with a modern day example, and you can see the position is even the same. And when you evaluate the internal structure, which you can in some of these cases, you can see some of the examples of the bone structure. Again, they are identical. And a garfish, very distinct fish. You can tell that pretty quickly from many other kinds of fish by the snout area here, and again you can see the same thing in the fossil record. This is a good example of the scales, which are very detailed, and they can be compared with the scales on a living garfish, and again we see they are identical. Spider, it's not just plants, but also in this case a spider. It's very detailed here, and you can see the modern example here. A dragonfly, very distinct. In fact, there's a lot of dragonflies in the fossil record, and you can see the wing structure, the general body shape, and so on is identical or close to it as far as we can tell from the fossil record. Ants, wasps, and so on, preserved in amber. Amber is tree sap. A lot of insects have ended up in amber, and therefore we can compare, especially external morphology, with modern-day ants, and we can see, in this case, a winged ant is identical.
Now, that isn't actually a fossil. That is the actual ant preserved inside the amber.
Ants preserve, and the amber preserves the body tissue fairly well. It's not perfectly preserved, but it's fairly well preserved, and of course, insects, they have a lot of chitin, which is preserved fairly well in the fossil record. And a grasshopper, and of course, you look at that, you can see, well, that's a grasshopper.
Now, there's a point that you're making with all of this, isn't there, sir?
Yeah, the point is very clear, and that is, when we look at these fossils and compare it with modern-day examples, we see virtually no change whatsoever. Now, in some cases I show later there is change, but the change is very minimal. And these are the earliest fossils that I've been able to find in the fossil record, in this case, for example, of a bee. And again, that's identical, as far as we can tell, to modern-day bees. Even when we do X-ray advancement of the inside of it, we can see here, this is a spider, and they date at 53 million years old. When we look at the internal structure of the spider, and the next slide shows that better, this is the bottom part, you can see here they literally dissected this with the X-ray machine, so you can see the internal structure of the spider. And again, all the work we've done shows that this 54 million year old dated spider is identical to modern-day spiders, even the external and internal parts. And a lobster, doesn't take much education to see that's a lobster, even though that's dated 146 million years. And no change at all. Turtles, this interests me because I've always liked turtles. And we see the earliest turtle in the fossil record is indeed a turtle, and it doesn't take, a 5-year-old could look at that and say, that's a turtle. The shell, very distinct, the head, and even some of the leg and tailbone are shown. A crocodile, even a crocodile, we can see, when we look at it, we can see the scales, etc. And again, we have a
now,
crocodile.
that must be a huge fossil, an entire crocodile.
Yeah, some of these fossils are enormous. They have to use earth-moving equipment in order to dig these out and also to move them. And to prevent them from cracking, they cover them with plaster. So the whole unit is moved so it doesn't crack and ruin the fossil. And this is a lizard, 200 million year old lizard, and you can see the detail in here is enormous. And we compare it with a modern-day lizard, and that's what we have. Snake. You can see the snake here.
Yes, sir.
And it's identical to, from, again, what we can tell, to a modern-day snake. Salamander, same thing. See all the details here. And a modern-day salamander, comparison is very clear. Frog, same thing.
Now, the frog is a 280 million year old frog. You have beside it a modern-day frog, and you're telling us that they're absolutely identical.
From what we can tell, and again, we don't have all of the tissue, so we can't do total comparisons.
But you've done so many different species that it seems to me we're building an incredible pattern here.
A very clear pattern we are building, that's true.
And the pattern is that you haven't shown us any evolution. None of these things have evolved. They have stayed identical. According to their numbers with the frog, they've stayed identical for 280 million years. Now, the question I ask is, so where is evolution happening?
That is the problem that evolutionists are aware of, and that is why creationists often point to the fossil record as one of the main evidences of creation.
So now the fossil record is not on the side of the evolutionist, it's on the side of the creationist.
From my study, about 25 years of the fossil record, clearly it supports creation and not evolution.
So the question I guess I want to ask you at this point is, have you ever seen a fossil, and you've looked at thousands of them, and there are billions of them, and I'm sure if there were some that were supporting transition, you would see that. Have you ever seen a fossil that supported the concept of transition from species to species?
When you look carefully at it, it does not support whale evolution. Horse evolution is another example we look at. There are many examples. Human evolution is probably the most well-known, but I've concluded pretty clearly that they may appear if you superficially look at the evidence, but once you examine it in detail, it does not support Darwinian evolution.
Now, Darwin said the fossil record would eventually either prove him right or prove him wrong. Am I quoting you right?
Yep.